Welcome to The New Next, a podcast that addresses current events and how they will impact the future. Co-hosted by the inquisitive public speaking champion, Mike McVeigh, and energy, economics, and technology expert, Matt Jensen. Join us as we explore all things energy, economic, tech, and political, and how they will affect our future. It seems like if we don't mention Elon Musk in some way in one of our episodes, or at least once a week in our episodes, PR machine. We're doing it wrong. But this time he's yeah, he really is. That's what everybody thinks he's a robot. He's not. He's a PR machine. So we've got. It's not just him though. Tesla, GM, and Rivian, and a few more are dependent on the $360 billion battery business for their ambitious electric vehicle plans. Electric vehicle plans. I hate saying EV. It makes me feel weird. But battery makers are struggling to turn out enough supply. So this seems like some similar stuff of what we're talking about with the tax credit and China, but maybe you can go into
generally around the renewable chain. Detail. There's been a lot of, I'd say, mineral shortages. So increases on price and base materials. We talked a while back of lithium prices, and it was something crazy, like up 1,600% in the last couple of years. So it was wild, but there's been a lithium capacity shortage. Granted, there's a lot of new capacity coming online, but most of the lithium in the world reserves are in the lithium triangle, which is like Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina, maybe in South America. It's 3 countries down there. So, you're basically dependent generally on a lot of disparate lithium stuff around the world. Like for instance, Afghanistan has a lot of lithium, but it's hard rock lithium that's hard and expensive to process. The lithium salts are your kind of ideal lithium, like you have in the lithium triangle, and that basically comes out of like a salty brine solution. So capacity is up, but so is the demand. And there's kind of been a shortage on a lot of these critical minerals to build batteries worldwide, plus the battery capacity. EVs are becoming pretty popular, hitting that tipping point where they're really becoming a in-demand consumer market. And that's putting these car makers in a situation where it's hard to necessarily get all the parts that they need to meet their sales goal and meet the demand that's actually there.
Yeah, I want to say this is one of the episodes that we originally recorded, but it got
I believe so
all the way recorded. Is that correct? Because this sounds very familiar about some of the stuff, mostly because we were talking about the travel, the difference between travel between city transport versus longer travel, and you mentioned a reference, and I see it in the notes. That's what made me kind of click. But
yeah,
if we did F-Zero's charging while driving. And tell you what, we're not going to say what F-Zero is, but if you know what it is without looking it up, send us a comment and we'll say your name out on the show.
Kind of not related necessarily that we're talking to now, but well,
I know
there's just a lot of these hurdles that, if you're a company, you want to show to support your growth prices or your stock price that you have, it's easier to miss sales goals if you can't get core commodities than it is because you don't have demand, I guess. And Tesla's, in my opinion, in a lot better situation than a lot of these other companies because they've focused more on being more vertically integrated, both in building their own battery manufacturing facilities. They've even talked about mining for lithium themselves, setting up their own lithium mines. They're some of the first to sign really kind of long-term nickel contracts with North American suppliers. And they also, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know, build a lot of their own semiconductors for their cars. That's not necessarily as big of a problem now than it was a while ago, but I think you've got this automotive market, and the same with airplanes, that their traditional business model has been highly dependent on third-party suppliers. So like subcontractors to provide core parts for their vehicles, right, where they're kind of like a designer and a final market assembler. But when you're going into this new market, the supply chains just aren't present. So they have to be built from scratch. And companies like Tesla that have worked a little harder to take control of their own future, I think, are better positioned in this situation. But it will take years to build out a proper third-party supplier network to support that in a traditional sense, like, you know, GM is used to. And we were talking about aerospace, like McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing. You know, that's their networks for third-party suppliers are massive. But so it's I remember like earlier reading about the new Bronco was like super in high demand during COVID. When it was released, there was a huge shortage of chips. So there were all these pictures of all these cars that were fully built Broncos basically sitting in lots that were basically just waiting for chips to show up so they could put them in and fulfill existing orders. And I kind of feel it's almost like a situation now where there's a lot of demand, but I don't know if there's necessarily going to be the supply of core materials to meet it at a reasonable price to fulfill that demand. And, you know, really with this, the mining sector needs to be scaled up dramatically. And that's something that we've been really unwilling to do in the U.S. There's the money available, but approving the permits and then also basically having a 8 to 10 year horizon to get these mines online from traditional methods is kind of a real problem. So we talked about recently some like game changing technology utilizing oil and gas methods to mine like they do for oil for some of these critical minerals. That's something that could really change the game on this, and it's not really fitting within the traditional mining permitting process. But it's just, you know, you basically have to build an industry that doesn't necessarily exist right now, and that's going to be quite the process. Yeah, but yeah, we were talking a little bit. You were talking about the F-Zero charging too, and I think that was kind of more related to. I don't think that there's enough solar or enough electric charging stations to really fit the amount of cars that EVs are going back on the road these days. So it'd be interesting. Yeah, you were talking about your friend.
That's right.
Who
sorry.
Was going rented a.
Yes.
You know, why don't you just tell a story?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a very short version. I had a really cool version, but one of my friends on Facebook ended up taking a 13-hour trip with a Tesla. They rented a Tesla for a day, go down to Dallas, pick up their kid and stuff, and it ended up being a 13-hour trip for what they said would probably have been about at most 8-hour trip. But because of charging and waiting for charging stations that were available, there was an additional 3 to 5 hours that easily took up most of the time. And that kind of stuff would have to definitely be more available. But yeah, and the total mile, like every time they went X amount of miles, basically they had to charge up again and stuff. And not like gasoline where, your tank holds 400 miles or whatever, and every 400 miles you have to get gas. No, it's like they could go from Oklahoma City down to Ardmore, I think, and then it was Ardmore to Grapevine, maybe, then Grapevine to Plano, Plano, and then between Plano and Oklahoma City, they had to fill up at least one more time or something, or charge up again. I probably should have checked to see if they actually got a Tesla. I think they decided not to, if I remember correctly. Though they thought it was really cool, it just wasn't worth all the extra stuff. But is this the one where we were talking about the trucking
we're talking
industry
about,
as well? Or is that another?
Well, I think what we were talking about was how. So the Minister of Energy, I believe, for China has really advocated that it's kind of like a 2-car solution. So you have for inner city travel, that's short-term travel, you have electric cars, and then you have a hydrogen-based car for longer-term travel because it fills up faster and goes longer for capacity. We talked about the Nikola truck, which was a fraud, so it didn't really work out that well. But there was a lot of excitement and investment in that because having basically a hydrogen truck that could use combustible renewable fuel and go longer distances would really, I would say, change a lot of things with trucking. So.
Yeah, and I'll give a quick version of that too. Basically, if you want to know that it's probably safe when it comes to motor vehicle type stuff, the trucking industry, if they've invested in it, then once all their trucks are just being guided by a caretaker and no longer a driver,
AI.
That's when you know that we've definitely hit the market, because they would love to reduce the human element as much as possible because of the maximum amount of profit that they can make. And I mean, because of driving laws, and rightfully so, for the protection of people and the way that our minds work when it comes to driving and stuff. But drivers can only drive so many hours consistently. And some of those restrictions were bumped up because of the pandemic, but they're going to be coming back down probably within the next year or so. So they would love to be able to have trucks running close to 24 hours a day or whatever the maximum is it could. Well, China's on a battery or whatever.
I would say far ahead of us in this area. They have, like Shanghai, for instance, I think they're getting to the point, or have already gotten there, where they've approved self-driving robot or self-driving taxis around the city without basically a caretaker there.
Mm-hmm.
So it will be, I think certain cities are kind of more gridded in a way, or section off, like maybe they have section off bike lanes and stuff like that. So you can drive familiar routes without a lot of variation. I think when that variable sense gets in there, then that kind of creates a lot of issues with stuff like, consumer transportation without stuff. But it's come a long way in recent years. I just think that there's going to be a lot of growing pains with this. And given the size of semis, it's, that can cause quite a lot of issues with casualties and stuff like that. So
I know this is kind of an offshoot, but this reminds me of a couple different things, if that's okay. So I'm not in that industry anymore. I switched industries, but I was very heavily involved in the motor vehicle industry, I guess you could say, from the government side. And some of the things that you just have to think about, for us regular drivers, that doesn't dictate most of the laws and the types of things that come into effect. Most of the laws are written specifically for the purpose of commercial driving, because commercial driving brings in a lot of money. So some of the things that, like you're talking about the size of a semi, if there was a way that they could put trailers where they had the best I can think of is like one of those little balls that you sit on at your desk, the little bouncy ball, that ergonomic. But if they had, instead of wheels on the sides, and they could have like 3 underneath the semi thing that somehow still kept stable, the money that would, or not the money, but the space issues that would save by not having to be determined on how you turn, like the different angles and stuff. But believe me, if there was a way that they could do it, they would buy it immediately. They would put that in effect because one, it would knock out their competition. Two, when my dad was driving in Quebec, it's a really interesting thing there because it's more or less, it's not anti-trucks, but it's not happy with big trucks. And he had a shipment, and he was telling me about all the little streets and stuff, and how it almost took 3 hours to move into to get put into a specific building for them to unload because of how restrictive the streets are, just like the size wise. And if there's a car parked on the road at all, basically a semi can't get through if they're trying to back up and stuff. And the nerd I am, so when I was more involved in this, there's a thing that got put out a few years ago that talked about how to make roads safer. And I know this is going a little bit off, but especially in Oklahoma, where we pay an unofficial tax every year. In fact, I just paid an unofficial tax yesterday for a new tire on my new vehicle for 50 days old. A nail or screw got put into the sidewall in a way where they can't repair the tire. The tires are not covered by any of the cool stuff with buying a new car, even though we bought like all that crap.
Yeah, the same thing happened to me.
We had to buy a new tire. And I'm like, and it's the unofficial tax of Oklahoma for the roads that we have because they're so horrible. So there was a study put into of how to make all roads with a special type of block that basically kind of think Legos or like even the earlier stuff like the railroad things where you connected the pieces and stuff. But they're made of a type of plastic that once it gets to a certain point, you could just change it out. You could use 3D printers technically and change out pieces of the road for so much cheaper than what it costs to concrete and asphalt the roads. And I wish I didn't even think about that when we were going through the stuff. I would have gotten that.
Yeah, we should talk about that again.
Kind of looked it up and sent it to you. And if I find it, I'll send it to you. But there's some really cool stuff of what they could do. A guy, I wasn't prepared, even though I should have been because I saw this, but it didn't click in my mind. You might be familiar with the show Adam Ruins Everything. And he had a podcast for a while called Adam Ruins Everything. And he interviewed people specifically about cars and grid work and stuff. And the guy had a book that talks about the auto industry and about basically how impossible, as bad as roads are and stuff, that there's ways that the government has tried a few different times to make it where they would save money and everything. But because of the things they'd have to give up were so negative for them that they decided to lobby against it and stuff. So it's just, some of this stuff is just really interesting. And it's amazing how many great ideas get rejected because of politicizing, whether it's politics or it's lobbyists or whatever. I mean, I bet even the stuff we're talking about, there's probably something better than electric vehicles, but it gets shot down all the time because people are like, but we still make money on electric vehicles. We don't make money on this other kind of crap and stuff. But
there's a car that recently, I don't think it's commercial yet, but it runs on water. So you fill it up with water and it runs. That'll be cool to see.
I wonder, it'd have to have something else though for the mechanic part to make it work, because water by itself doesn't have
hydrogen and oxygen are both combustible elements, though.
Not exhilarant.
Yeah.
Right, but you have to have something to be able to break that down that doesn't do it naturally. Only reason why I know this is not because I'm smart, but my physics professor in college, somebody proposed that, and he said, that's great.
Yeah.
Show me how you do it without using another energy source. And so, yeah, I'm really interested in that. We definitely need to talk about that. If you would like to learn more about the New Next podcast, find us at thenewnextpodcast.com, where you can suggest a topic you would like for us to cover. If you enjoyed what you heard, share the podcast, tell a friend about it, or rate us with 5 stars.